Oh, I just love that music. Hey, everyone. Hi, welcome to the Give Back Show. Wow. I heard an echo. I hope that didn't come across. So anyway, sorry, folks, and welcome again to the Give Back Show, where the goal of which is to really showcase and highlight a lot of the good that people in fantasy football are doing. There's so many great fantasy football charity leagues and events, and really, I'm hoping to be able to bring those folks to this show, share their stories, and tell about all the good that they're doing, with the hope that that encourages others to also contribute and participate. Tonight, we're really fortunate to have Eric Romoff, one of those great people that is actively running a charity league called Pros with JOES. And he's going to tell us his story, as well as what led him to running Pros with JOES. And hopefully this will give us a chance to, applaud the great work that he is doing. So Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick. Happy to be here. Point of order. I wasn't hearing an echo, so I think we're all good in terms of your connection.
Good. I apologize if there was. So technical difficulties, including the internet, but looks like we're all good. Hey, I'd like for you to first start off by sharing some information about you, so that the folks on the audience will get to know you a little bit better, and then we'll start talking about Pros with JOES. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and tell us all about you.
Sure. I'll try to be brief. It's not my strong suit. I love long walks on the beach. I'm not much of a talker, but I love to listen. No, so I am currently residing in San Antonio, Texas. I am a native Texan of the Houston area originally, but been out in San Antonio long enough to call it home. Don't have any real intention on leaving, but maybe we'll see what comes up. I have been married to my lovely wife for going on 14 years now. We have two kids, two boys, 10 and 7, those being Gus and Samson. They keep me plenty busy. Being a South Central Texan by birth, I am a avid Houston Texans fan, which up until recently was kind of a weird thing. Nobody was really on that bandwagon. Now we're welcoming people on.
Darn,
Yeah,
best team in Texas.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in San Antonio, this is Cowboys country. I'm still an outsider in these woods, but yeah, that's I guess those are kind of the big notes about me.
All right. Well, and that's great. And as someone who lives in Montgomery, which is just north of Houston,
Neck of the woods.
we're right here in the same part of town. So, and
Yeah.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about you, like where you work. What are you a professional fantasy football person, or do you also have a day job that you have to also satisfy?
Yeah, I definitely have day job responsibilities that I have to satisfy. I'm one of the many people that puts in a full-time workload in the fantasy industry, but not quite having made the jump to full-time employment in the space. So my day job is in the exhilarating world of municipal finance. I work for a fintech startup that serves that space, which is something that I am rapidly learning more and more about, but definitely has its intricacies and its intrigue. But by and large, basically anytime that I'm not on the clock for work or not doing something with my kids or my family, I'm generally either creating fantasy content or thinking about it for longer than I would like to admit.
Yes, and with your voice, I would have guessed you've worked in radio at some point. You have a beautiful voice for radio. and a
Oh,
good
thank
face for television too. But
I was gonna
you're
say
both
I've been
doing
told I have a
fantastic.
face for radio, but yeah, I do my best to stay in front of a microphone wherever I can. It's definitely one of my favorite mediums, whether it's audio only or jumping on live streams like this.
Well, and one of the things that, obviously juggling multiple things, the league, your work, your family obligations. One of the
Mhm.
things I like to highlight is the fact that, you're able to manage all of this and more. So, but there is a lot of time that's, required to do even just running a fantasy league to begin with. But
Sure.
running a charity league has more and more responsibilities. Can you share a little bit about what you're involved with, or how you accomplish that?
Yeah. I guess what I would just say on the whole is that if you're dedicated enough to getting to a particular outcome, there's always enough time in the day. And some of the timing was kind of serendipitous in terms of when we started the charity league was in 2020, right in the heart of COVID and kind of adjusting to that new reality. And for me, that meant working from home with two school age kids while my wife was trying to work from home, right? So it definitely helped me gain a new understanding of efficiency and just the amount of things you can get done in a very small window of time. And that's something that I've applied my work in the space in managing the fantasy league in my family life, in my professional life as well. In terms of the, I guess, kind of the involvement that goes into the managing and facilitating the charity league, a lot of it is really kind of front loaded, right? Like our busiest time, our biggest push, our most involvement is during our preseason fundraising cycle, where we're basically trying to spread and generate awareness around this whole series of fundraisers that we're running. The winner of each, or rather, donors to each fundraising is enter into a drawing, and the winner of which is paired up with a fantasy professional in this sort of expert league, right? So the craziest part of the year is the lead up to all of that, right? Just constantly doing appearances, trying to promote the various fundraisers, just trying to get the word out there. It's definitely a volume game, and once we get into the season, fortunately, we've had a lot of our fantasy pros be with us in return for many many years. Several of them, all 5 years of our existence. So they're very familiar with the format. We run on Sleeper, which everyone is pretty well versed in. So in season, it's really not. It's not a ton of day to day management, right? We're working with professionals here, so they largely are pretty self sufficient, and just little questions crop up here and there about scoring or format or whatever it might be.
And what got you first into fantasy? We'll dive more into the pros with Joe's, but what got you into fantasy football to begin with?
It's kind of a two-part story. Funny enough, he denies these claims, but I have pretty clear recollection of my dad scoring either a fantasy team or a fantasy league off of the USA Today. Right, it stands out pretty distinctly in my mind. I guess it's a little bit foggier in his, but that was kind of like the introductory point for me in terms of my individual involvement. It was a few years later. It was around 2006 ish when I moved out to San Antonio. I was working as a part-time job in a mattress store of all places. We had Saturday morning meetings, like staff meetings, before we all went out to our stores and got on with the day. And there was a bit of a commotion in the corner, a kerfuffle, if you will, of some sort of disagreement, right? It was probably the only exciting thing that ever happened in any of these meetings. And turns out it was a pretty vocal argument about whether or not the league should switch to this newfangled scoring system called PPR. A lot of touchdown only fans in this league, but that was where I sort of introduced, or I was made aware that in my social circles there were people playing this game, and because a few people were vehemently opposed to it, they very quickly had a couple spots open up in their league. So I just kind of shoehorned my way into it. And the rest, as they say, was history. That was kind of my league of record for a few years. And then, as I got more and more comfortable with the game and more enticed by it, started expanding out to, a couple of leagues, dozens of leagues at one point. I've now done my best to try to walk it back to a more reasonable count in terms of managed leagues and shift to a little bit more best ball exposure.
Yeah, I in my second entry into fantasy football, because I first tried in 1989, way before the internet, way before, all this content and, information advice was available through, fantasy platforms, as well as just Twitter and the internet overall. So it was like you went into a draft with an annual. I think the one I had was the Sporting News annual, and that's how you prepped for the draft. And then you went to the newspaper and got your statistics or the game results out of the newspaper, and then you didn't email, you mailed your rosters to the commissioner who somehow organized it. But my second time back into fantasy football, after I played that for a year, I said, this is not for me. The second time in, of course, it was a standard league. It was a one quarterback standard league. And it just, now that I think back, that seems so archaic. But again, it seems like that's the way we all kind of, got the on-ramp into the fantasy world. Now, I know that you're also involved with fantasy organizations. Can you tell us a little bit about where people probably have seen your writing or seen a podcast or two from you?
Hey, buy and sell. Good to see you.
Sam's always
probably just about everywhere, honestly. I have a bit of a problem where I just like to say yes to things. So that has lent itself to me contributing to a variety of different platforms over the years. The ones that I am most active with, and the ones that I'm currently carrying forward into 2025. In Between Media, I am the general manager over there, which means I do some kind of behind the scenes stuff. But I also am the standing co-host for the In Between Media Fantasy Football podcast that is every Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. Except for this very Tuesday, we're going to move it over to tomorrow at 10 p.m. Because we're waiting for some more. No, not at all. We were hoping to stick to schedule, but we're covering combine prop bets, and right now the market's still a little thin. So we're hoping that there'll be a few more lines that we can talk about come this time tomorrow. But yeah, every Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. Eastern. You can check us out at the In Between Media Twitter handle and on the YouTube page as well. I am also the co-founder of the One and Done CBB show. We're going all in on college basketball. We're some of the only sickos that are covering the sport year round. During the season, a lot of our content is to do with college basketball DFS, prop bets, things like that. And then in the off season, we really lean into the transfer portal, player movement, conference previews. We interview a lot of coaches, head coaches over there as well. So One and Done CBB on YouTube is where you can find all of that. And in this most recent season, I jumped on to the charting team over at FTN Fantasy, which has been incredible, and just really wanted to invest in my own personal film study. And it's wild to see all of the tools that are born out of this just massive team of charters. So really cool to play a small role over there as well.
And charting is a challenge. I mean, it's a difficult task because you're having to identify players oftentimes without the, ability to see, the jersey numbers. So you're having to identify them based on, their tape or their
wild. You can pick up on it from their tendencies, from their alignments. Probably my favorite one, I'll give two. I was largely charting the Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Go Birds, fly Eagles, fly. The easiest way for me to identify Devonta Smith and AJ Brown was because a lot of it's from the sideline view, right? It's at the 50-yard line, and Devonta Smith's calf looks like a pencil. It looks like it looks like a toothpick out there, and AJ Brown's is all beefy, right? So that was a real quick way to get an identify him. And it also, randomly enough, as they got into the playoff run, and if you go back and watch the Super Bowl, they were doing it all game long. Specifically, whenever the Eagles were in shotgun, Mekhi Becton, their guard, would look back at Jalen Hurts and look for some sort of signal. And before the snap came, he would take his left hand, hold it in the air, and slap the center as the indication that he needed to snap the ball. I was kind of surprised that we didn't see more people
teams picking up on that,
on that, and take advantage of it. In the Super Bowl specifically, there were some plays where it seemed like there was a bit of cat and mouse of adjusting to the adjustment, right? But it's all these tiny little things, who wears black socks versus white socks, who wears a sleeve versus doesn't wear a sleeve or a visor. It's kind of crazy, the tiny little intricacies that can help you identify a player.
And the challenge of that, of course, is that you need to be able to identify those players quickly, that you're able to be accurate as well. And, all of a sudden a player runs off the field as part of a position switch, or, players don't always, line up where they line up on the previous play. And if you happen to miss them, you're wrong. So, but you're right. It's also a great way to increase your knowledge about the game and player tendencies. I know when I was trying to do it on the college side, Michigan and Ohio State were two teams that just so happened to be, at least for the training, was, heavy doses of those. So I was able to see a lot of JJ McCarthy, also able to see a lot of Colson Loveland. And so, and again, of course, now we're hoping to see JJ this year with the Vikings, and we're hoping to see where Colson Loveland lands as one of the top tight ends. So, but yeah, that's great. And, I'm sure you then leverage it for your other analysis of football as well.
Oh, 100%. Right. A lot of my charting this year was player personnel. So really just keeping track of alignments and formation and motion and things like that. So I feel like I kind of have a sneak peek at what Kellen Moore is going to do down in New Orleans, right? Because he was calling plays for those Eagles, right? And it definitely helped me get a sense of, what sort of tendencies were out there, or what sort of formations or sets Jalen Hurts was more comfortable throwing in, as opposed to the team was more comfortable running in, right? So a little bit more macro, but you can definitely pick up on a couple of things that will help you identify, like if you wanted to get into the live betting markets, right? Things that may be coming up on the next play or in the next sequence, or just how much of an impact a player coming or going from an offensive line might play on the rest of the offensive effectiveness. So it's definitely been really cool to kind of double click on some of the game within the game that film study will illuminate.
Well, that's great. And you did earlier, you mentioned that you're a Texan fan, which is good news, because also a Texan fan since they started. But, what are your thoughts about this coming year? Do you have, do you think that they're going to be more successful this year, get further into the playoffs? Do you have any advice for us Texan fans who might be looking at, possibility drafting Texans in the upcoming drafts?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting spot, right? Like I mentioned, for the longest time, we were really in the doldrums there, just kind of slogging our way through, and then all of a sudden, through the course of that 2023 draft, we suddenly had, pillars on both the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and we're very competitive. It's kind of weird to think that, we were in a mostly competitive game in the divisional round against the team that went on to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. and yet it still felt like kind of a disappointing season, right? Like that magic from the year prior just wasn't there. A lot of it had to do with pressures and the offensive line just really having a hard time keeping CJ Stroud clean, right?
Mhm.
The highest pressure rate in the league, I think it was about 27%. Second most in pressures allowed, the most hurries allowed, 54 sacks, which is an insane number, right? It's taking us back to like those David Carr days, right? Where he
Yeah.
was just getting beat up.
The first season, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The crazy thing is, like, the offensive line at times played fairly well. We've got several players that grade out actually pretty favorably individually. So I think some of it is more of a schematic thing, just getting those guys in positions to win. Honestly, the biggest thing looking back on the season with a few weeks clarity of the emotions dying down, I think letting Andrew Beck go and moving away from the fullback being a prominent position in the offense had a dramatic impact, not only on protections, but also on how the defense was approaching their coverage and their alignment, right? How they were essentially just manning up on, on making sure the math checked out. I don't know if we'll go back and sign another fullback. We were one of the few teams that carried one, specifically for that role. But I would love nothing else to see this team go out and dedicate a roster spot to the fullback position. And then we need to address really the interior of both lines, the offensive line being the priority, probably a secondary priority on the defensive line. And I would really like to see us go out and bring in some wide receiver depth, right? Now that we're looking at T. Higgins very likely to be franchise tagged, and there being optimism that Chris Godwin is going to return to the Buccaneers, all of a sudden Stephon Diggs is like one of, if not the best free
Looking good
agents to hit
again.
the receiver market, right? And I don't think that we certainly don't have the money to keep him, right? Maybe we have the intention, but I think we're very likely going to be looking at a circumstance where Steph Diggs is out the door, Tank Dell's gruesome leg injury happened very late in the season, right? So I don't think we
He's
can
not
really
gonna be
count on
back.
him
Yeah.
contributing in a meaningful way next year, right? So all of a sudden, Nico Collins is, for my
By
money,
himself.
my biased opinion, a top 5 receiver in this league, right?
Yeah.
But after that, it gets
He's
kind of
by himself.
ugly. We got a lot of guys that are old, a lot of guys that are bad, a lot of guys that are old and bad from wide receiver 2 and down. So I definitely think that we'll look to probably address it in the draft and maybe bring in a couple of KG veteran types that can get you a key first down and things like that.
And despite the fact that it's a very deep running back draft, running back really is less of a concern or issue. They've got Mixon, who obviously played well. I know that the backup got a lot of heat a couple of years ago, but I think that again that the running back situation is actually pretty decent. I hear that they're looking at defensive line with the first pick. I'd kind of like to see an offensive lineman since, I do think it really makes it hard for Stroud to be successful if he's always on his back. But, again, we'll see when, their pick comes up. If they move back in the draft, since it is a deeper draft, maybe they can, acquire more assets that way.
I think that's really it, right? More so than anything, I would love to see them get creative and move up and down the board a bit. And I have to say, shout out and kudos to Nick Caserio. I was not optimistic about that hire when they brought him in. That was in the Bill O'Brien era where it's just like all of the leftover parts from the Patriots
All the
can just come on
Patriots,
down to
yeah.
Houston and just get overpaid to do nothing. And all of a sudden, he is up there as one of the best GMs in the entire NFL, just objectively. Like, you look at his hit rates, you look at how many, projected generational or Hall of Fame players he has out there. You look at the way that he's managing the cap and getting out and ahead and paying guys early and staying nimble. Like, got to give this guy his flowers. I was not expecting this, but I'm very happy that we're in this set of circumstances.
Yeah, the
And
last
in
couple
terms
of
of where
drafts have
we
been great with the defensive backs. They've been able to get their defensive backfield is
all of a sudden,
best.
like, 1 through 5, probably one of the most talented groups in all of the league. We'll see if we can keep everyone. We've got at least, 2 or 3 that we can feel confident about returning. To your point about what we do in the first round, I think some of that is circumstantial, right? Like if we stick and stay with where we're currently slotted to pick, it's kind of a dead zone for offensive linemen, right? Like,
Sure. Mhm.
there's a big grouping of guys that are ranked somewhere in like the 25 to 40 range, right? Whereas it gets a little bit thinner with interior defensive line around that point. So we might just do kind of best player available, and I think that probably would be a defensive lineman, but ideally I would like to move out of that pick and see if we can't, stack up a few more assets.
Definitely. Well, we could, I mean, to be honest, I could talk with you about the Texans all night long, but
Yeah, let's
the
just do that.
important
Let's
thing
just
we're
make it a
supposed
Texan show.
yeah, the important thing we were supposed to do is talk about the great charity league that you're running. And so um, let's go ahead and switch and go to the Pros with Joe's charity league. And perhaps you could give us a little bit of an introduction to it, and then we'll kind of dive in with a little bit more detail.
Sure. So Pros with Joes is a charity fantasy football league. We, like many charity leagues out there, are bringing together players and participants of all stripes and backgrounds and experience levels. What is one of the things that is uniquely different about our approach, instead of just kind of having everyone pop into these massive leagues and play in conferences or divisions with a mixture of experienced professionals and casual or everyday players, we're bringing people together. Every single one of our teams is a pair of co-managers, a fantasy pro, and then an everyday player who donated to that pro's charity of choice in order to earn a chance at winning their way into the league. So last year we expanded. In year number 5, we went up to 70 teams. It was a lot. So no mathematician, 140 participants across manager and co-manager. And it's been a lot of fun, right? I think it creates a pretty unique experience for the everyday player, in that, instead of just kind of managing their roster against an expert or in an experts league, they're actually working right alongside them, right? It's almost like a master class in fantasy football, right? They're part of the conversation when they're making lineup decisions, when they're deciding, who to add and who to cut, right? So definitely much more of like an immersive kind of one-to-one experience, and it's been cool to see, right? Like there have been lifelong friendships that have been born out of these people being paired together. There have been job opportunities, there have been new shows created, right? So it's cool to see everyone come together, and we have the added benefit of being able to do it to the to the hymnal of raising money for a number of different amazing causes.
And it's cool that you are having I guess, the pros of the Pros with Joe's, choosing the charity that's most important to
Yeah.
them. And so, as opposed to just having one charity that everyone is working towards, can you name off some of the, or examples of some of the charities that have been supported in the past?
Oh man, I will try to do my best to be
No, yeah,
inclusive.
and it doesn't have to be
It is a
exhaustive, but just to give us
yeah,
an idea.
it is a wide ranging list. It's one of the things that I like about the format. I heard from so many industry experts that they have these causes that are near and dear to them, and they want to find a way to use their platform to benefit it, but they don't have the time to go through figuring out the logistics, right? So in terms of types of causes, everything under the sun, right? We have a lot of people that play for the Alzheimer's Foundation. We see a lot of stuff for cystic fibrosis. We see pretty much every different individual variety of cancer support, as well as some of the bigger organizations like the American Cancer Society or St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, right? Animals are huge, right?
Hmm,
Basically every city's humane society or adoption resource
nice.
of choice is represented out there. All kinds of civil and social societies, the Innocence Project, food pantries, homeless shelters, right? Whatever it might be,
Wow.
we've pretty much covered it all. I'm trying to think of some of the more niche ones. There was someone who played for not like a pet rescue facility, but it was actually like a wildlife rescue facility
Mhm.
in their local area. So if there was wildlife of any sort and variety that was injured, they would bring them in, help nurse them back to health, and get them back to a point where they could be
Oh, how
released into the
cool.
wild. That was a cool one. But ultimately, the thing that's really cool about it is like we're designed in a way where we can kind of say yes to pretty much any foundation or charity out there, and you get to hear and learn about the different ways that these different organizations have touched the lives of the professional that decided to raise money for them.
And what's really cool about that is because people are choosing something, a charity that's close to them, that, they might have a family member or,
Mhm.
something that they've done in the past that, has drawn them to that charity. It becomes more personal. And I think there's more of their heart in what they're doing, what they're playing for. So it's really impressive that you've organized it to be something that allows people to connect with what they're doing. Um, I think I've seen some large numbers that have also been, discussed in the past with the, how much money is being raised. Are you comfortable with sharing some of the numbers part of this?
Yeah, yeah. So we've now gone through 5 seasons. We're heading into year number 6, and in total, we've helped raise a little over $80,000 at this point.
Wow, that's
Um,
so good.
and the cool thing about it is that a lot of it is in smaller increments, right? We're not having huge donor matching inclusions, or a mega donor or two, right? The vast majority of it are people donating 5, 10, $20, whatever they can spare. But we try to cast a wide enough net to where it's been able to put together a very impactful sum of money.
Oh, that's so impressive. And again, being able to make a difference, which, you know, you know, we play for fun. And of course it's,
Yeah,
there's a competitive aspect, and I'm sure the pro and with Joe teams, want to win and, be able to hold that over other people, since we all are a
yeah,
pretty competitive bunch. But more importantly, that you're doing it for such a good cause that means something to you personally. That's so impressive. How in the world? I mean, were you just sitting around one time thinking, "Gee, I'd like to do something different"? And how did you come up with the idea for Pros with Joes?
yeah. I wish I could take full credit for the initial kind of light bulb moment and the full vision from the get go. Honestly, it was kind of happenstance. My co-founder Rob Thomas, he sent out a tweet in, man, I want to say it was like 2.5 weeks before the start of the 2020 NFL season. And he was just kind of like gauging interest, right? Like, if we put together a charity league that, was formatted as such where you're co-managing with someone in the industry, would you be interested? And it immediately stood out to me as something that was different, right? It was a different and unique approach to it. So I hit him up, and we just immediately got after it, started ideating and coming up with different iterations and different thoughts, and what if we did this? And the as the story goes, the actual original light bulb was from a suggestion of Dave Richard over at CBS Sports, our eventual Pros with Joe's one champion. Oddly enough,
Nice.
they were looking to give away spots in their listener league, and he suggested that if someone donated to his charity of choice, which is St. Jude. CBS does great work for St. Jude. That he would be open to co-managing, to essentially sharing his spot in the CBS Listener League. So that was really where the idea
Inspired
kind of
it.
came
Wow.
from.
Yeah.
We reached out to Dave and asked if we can kind of run with this idea and see if there was some legs to it. And at first, especially given the relatively small reach of myself and Rob combined, and it being so close to the beginning of the 2020 season, I mean, we were crossing our fingers and throwing salt over our shoulder and saying prayers that we could get 10, 12 people together to participate. And then all of a sudden, my now friend Marcus Grant jumped in. We reached out to him, asked if he could participate. Unfortunately, it was a little too late in the season for him, as was the response in many cases. But he got to work. He immediately started connecting us with people and opening up his network and opening up his his contact book. And that was really the jumping off point where we were able to get up to 28 leagues or 28 teams in that first year's league, and have been off and running ever since.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it, but just to reinforce it, so how many people? I think you said 70 pairings or
Last year
70.
it was 70 teams, yeah, 70 teams of co-managers, so 140 people on the roster.
And is the expectation it's going to continue to grow each year as more people find out about it? And or is there like a certain size that you can't go beyond just because of what it takes to manage that many different teams playing
Yeah.
at one time?
Yeah, I don't know if there's that kind of strict line of demarcation where it'll just be too much to manage, right? I think the thing that I'm always mindful of, because last year was the first year that we jumped up to 70. The two prior seasons we were at 56. We like to structure our format as 14 team leagues just to make it a little bit tougher.
Sure.
We like those unique structures. So 70 last year, 56 the prior two, the prior two to that, or excuse me, the prior one to that, we were down at 42. I think it's really just about kind of getting a gauge of what there's appetite for, right? I want to be mindful of not oversaturating the space. I also just I personally feel kind of weird like around fundraising time, like I'm just popping up everywhere, and I feel like I've always got my hand out, right? So I don't. I'm mindful of not being annoying or not being a pest, right? Last year I intended on sticking with 56 as I had in the prior two, and then I had a few more pros reach out to me saying they were wanting to participate. I had a few both new and returning donors, casual players reach out saying, "Oh, you have to get this person in," or "I'd really love it if this person could make their way in." So it seemed like there was that interest to expand out to 70, but I certainly don't want to go so far to where we're seeing kind of a diminished return in terms of the number of people donating, or asking people to kind of overextend themselves to get into a number of different fundraisers, because each one of these fundraisers is essentially on an island onto itself, right? You are donating specifically to Nicholas Hoover, our champion from last year. You're donating to his fundraiser that is going to the Alzheimer's Foundation, right? So if you just donate there, you're only entered for your chance to win to co-manage with Nick, right? With Hoove. But if you want to get into the pool with a dozen different pros, all of our pros, right? All of a sudden, that becomes a bigger and bigger ask, and I want to be mindful that we're not
Sure.
overextending the amount of grace and graciousness that we're asking from the community.
And since we are a fantasy football site, and of course, there's going to be people who are interested in how the league runs in terms of the format and any interesting or different unique rules or scorings that exist within Pros with JOES.
Yeah. So I mentioned that we operate around 14 team conferences. Essentially, each one of those conferences operates like its own league through the regular season. And then when we get into the playoffs, we just smush everyone together. Essentially, we've got a line of demarcation around both total points and division record within your conference. And then the first round of our playoffs, because it's week 14, you'll start with your average weekly scoring and then score on top of it. Top 8 advance into more of a bracket style head-to-head format. So that's kind of the macro level. At the micro level, this was actually a change that we put into place in the second year, and I don't know if I will ever move off of it. Maybe never say never, but starting in year 2, we went to a largely positionless format. So
Hmm.
everyone must roster and start a quarterback, and then they start 8 flexes across running back, wide receiver, and tight end.
Wow, fun.
Um, yeah, and the idea was really twofold, right? Like, we're bringing together what I believe to be some of the best minds in the fantasy space, and I wanted to give them as much agency as possible, right? You can literally do
Creativity
whatever you
and
want with your team,
differentiation.
right?
Yes.
Just
Yes. Nice.
make it your own. But there was also a functional reason. At the end of that first season, when we smashed everyone together for our playoffs, we found that a lot of teams had a lot of the same players, right? Those quote unquote fantasy MVPs were out there and highly represented in our playoff tournament. So there
Mhm.
were many games where, 2, 3, 4 of the same players in each roster were facing off, right? Whereas when you open it up, the frequency by which we saw that, went down pretty significantly. So it helped us, kind of mitigate those overlapping rosters in the playoffs, but also it leads to a lot of fun in draft day. It leads to a lot of creativity and a lot of unique thinking in terms of how Pro and Joe decide to put their rosters together.
Oh, how nice. And again, one of the things that sounds really cool is to be able to, as a Joe, to be able to, say, gee, I'm with David Richards, uh, and getting a chance to, perhaps even could get some of that knowledge and approach
Yeah.
and then apply it to my other leagues too. What a great idea and what a great opportunity to become a better player, playing alongside some of these really well-known people. I'm also kind of curious, though. Anything changing going into your next or into this new season? Do you have any ideas or anything that will kind of change the game a bit?
Yeah, I don't know if we have anything super splashy or even necessarily anything all that impactful in terms of the actual donor or player experience. We're working on some kind of behind the scenes stuff in terms of how we organize and how we stay in communication with our participants and things like that. Actually, perfectly timed. Sniper Mel in the comments right now makes mention of starting the promoting process a little bit earlier. That's actually a functional limitation of the platform, the tool we use for fundraising. So hoping, fingers crossed, that we'll be able to move on to a different platform that gives us a little bit more latitude around that. We were working with PayPal's giving network previously, and their fundraisers can only run for 30 days. So it kind of
Wow.
kind of forces us into that mad dash mode that I've been bemoaning a little bit. So hopefully, with some help from a few people and some connections that we've made, we'll be able to start that process a little bit sooner and just kind of spread out the fundraising cycle a little bit deeper into the summer, hopefully.
Oh, wow. And again, this is all, and I'll ask, towards the end, how people can get in contact with you.
Sure.
If there's a website, if you have Twitter, or X, addresses you want people to contact. Um, but I'm just guessing this is a labor of love, but it's also a labor. I mean, how much time, and how many people are involved with running this, and how much time of yours is consumed with this?
Yeah, so during that fundraising cycle and the weeks leading up to it, it is all encompassing. It is
Wow.
it is largely every waking moment heading up to it. It is certainly a labor of love, and generally one that I head into every year in as a lone wolf, right? I am the only operator of Pros with Joes every single year, but fortunately I've made many friends and added many colleagues over the course of my time running the charity and in the space. So I have no shortage of people that, as things are starting to get crazy, will reach out and help me set up leagues or help me promote something or put together some messaging or whatever it might be, right? So, we operate fairly lean, right? Like we ourselves are not actually a charity, right? We are essentially just facilitating fundraisers through a platform, and all of that money goes directly from PayPal or platforms to be named later to the charity itself, right? So like we don't really have the burden of having much infrastructure around our organization to have to maintain. It's really just about ramping up these fundraisers, recruiting new pros to play every year, and then making sure that we're effectively getting the word out there.
And the platform you use, I mean, not the charity aspect of the platform, but are you on Sleeper, MFL?
Yeah, we're a sleeper shop.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
Again, they are really good about creating a user interface that's friendly, especially for newer players who would be perhaps intimidated by MFL. But so that's good to see. And also, they seem to be very responsive to requests for changes or improvements. So that's great to see as well. Wow, I tell you, I'm Eric. This has been like it's just a great experience. I'm really loving the league and the approach and maybe even more importantly, all the great things that you have done with the league and all the money that's been raised and all the the charities that have been supported. It's such an awesome thing. People that are watching, I'm sure, are going to want to know how to get a hold of you or how to get a hold of more information about Pros with Joes. So why don't you go ahead and let us know how they can do that?
Yeah, we are generally out there, and we're pretty consistent in our naming convention. So it's at Pros with Joes on Twitter or proswithjoes.com. We haven't started officially or openly announcing that registration is open, but for the sports affiliate faithful here, registration's open. If you go to proswithjoes.com, right there on the homepage is a simple little form. I think it's like 4 or 5 questions, and that will allow you to get.
Excuse me, you may have to close out the show. I have to run to my keyboard right now, so I can jump in there before Mel does.
Yeah, we try to keep things painfully simple, right? So I think it's 4 or 5 fields. It's basically like, what's your name and what's the best way to get a hold of you, and that will get you into our ecosystem and our mailing list. So that way, when we start fundraising, when we're looking for people to participate in one way or another, when we're doing fun promotions or whatever it might be, you'll be the first to know. That is the easiest way to get started. proswithjoes.com. If anybody out there fancies themselves a fantasy football pro, we are always looking for fresh faces to add to our roster. So you can either fill out that form, you can drop me a DM at the Pros with Joe's handle. You can send me a DM to my personal handle at FantasyNav. Generally speaking, we're out there trying to be readily available and responsive. So whatever channel makes the most sense. Team at proswithjoes.com is our email address. Whatever method and vehicle is the easiest for y'all out there, we're more than happy to answer any questions or talk about ways to get involved.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for coming and taking time to share your story and the story of Pros with Joes. It's an awesome charity league, and it's making such a big impact. Really do appreciate everything you and the folks behind the league are doing, and I hope more people will reach out and help grow it even more, to the next level. Also, in fact, if anyone out there is running a charity league or a charity event and would like to be a guest on a future Tuesday night Give Back show, just reach out to me. My Twitter account, I think, is right about there, and I'd love to be able to shine the light on the great stuff that you and your leagues are doing. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Next Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to have Pestoff, who will be telling us about the Fantasy football best ball bonanza and the charities that league is supporting. So thanks again, everyone, for watching the show and supporting the show. And please remember to be good, do good, and when you get a chance, give back. And thanks, everyone. JC, you can go ahead and take us home.